Hello and welcome to this second video in my series of films entitled Conducting Fundamentals. Today I'm going to be thinking about the baton. Is it necessary for a conductor to use a baton? And if so, how do we choose one? In the popular imagination, a conductor is probably somebody standing on a high platform, wearing fine clothing, waving a stick in front of them at the orchestra, rather like a magician might wave their magic wand around when they're doing certain tricks. The baton being firmly there at the centre of that image. And it has been like that for a good number of generations now. But is it really necessary? Mozart, Bach, for example, would not have used a baton. Some modern conductors don't use batons. For example, Kurt Masur, Valery Gergiev, who basically now never uses a baton of standard type. And then there are those who use the baton for a good amount of the time, but for sections or perhaps for a whole movement on occasions, put the baton out of the way and conduct with their hands alone, almost as if they're trying to hide the baton up a sleeve. Examples of this could be Leonard Bernstein, Andris Nelson's. Very effective it can be too. I myself would not use a baton in certain circumstances. If I was conducting a choir a cappella, in other words a choir on its own without any instruments, I would always use just my hands. Choirs are not used to conductors in such a circumstance using a baton. Always just the hands are used. Again, if I was conducting quite a small orchestra, I might just use my hands. And for music such as Bach's St. Matthew or St. John Passion, I don't use a baton. But for what I would call symphonic repertoire, so music from the time of Beethoven onwards, I would always use a baton. I say from Beethoven's time onwards because that's the time when the orchestra was really starting to enlarge, and enlarged a lot through the 19th century. And it's when you get a bigger orchestra that the baton comes into its own. Imagine a large orchestra. The trombones and the percussion, for example, are quite a way away, and it can really aid the clarity of the beat travelling to them by the use of a baton. I would consider it essential that the beginner conductor uses a baton. If at some stage later on he or she decides for some reason to dispense with it, or not to use it in certain circumstances like myself, that's fine. They've learnt to use it in the first place. It is the recognised tool of the trade, and it really is worth getting to grips with. It will make it easier, for example, to watch videos about conducting, or to read books, go on courses, because the baton is used almost universally in such circumstances. I will, however, at a later point, be making reference in one film to how to conduct using the hands alone and the difference between hands and baton, but that's not for today. So, if I consider using a baton for the beginner to be essential, how do we choose one? Well, the thing not to do is to go to your computer, go to Google, put in conducting baton and buy the first one that comes up in the search results. What you need to do is to get into a shop and try batons out. It might surprise you, but there are a large variety of types of baton. It looks very much like just a bit of wood with a bit of something to hold it at the end, which is essentially all it is. But there are many, many types. Let me show you just a few. This one I've got here that I use most of the time is about 16 inches long, and it has a bit of cork at the end here, about 2 inches long, where I hold it. Here are another couple of ones with cork at the end. This one's got a different shape, just slightly bulbular bit there, slightly larger than the last one, about the same length, but quite a bit thicker. The stick is quite a lot thicker, and the thickness and weight of the stick will affect, of course, how it feels in your hand. Here's one with a different shaped bit of cork at the end, sort of shaped like that, so you can sort of fit your hand, your thumb and fingers around that shape. Here are some wooden ones. These two have a dark wooden end, similar in construction to that last, that penultimate cork one I showed you. They're very thick, again about 16 and 18 inches I think, those two. Here's a shaped wooden one, so it sort of goes in and comes out a little bit, again so you can fit your hand in there nice and comfortably. Here's a slightly smaller one, I guess this is about 14 inches, with a very simple little wooden end, finely tapered, that one. And one more wooden one. This one is unusual because it's made out of one piece of wood. The others have all been, like I said, a stick with something pushed on the end. This is just made out of one piece of wood. I think it may well have been longer at some point. The end is fractionally rough. It was owned by the composer-conductor George Lloyd, so it's a fairly old baton, I think. Probably custom made, maybe he made it himself, I don't know. And it's worth noting that in the earlier part of the 20th century, batons were very frequently thicker and often much longer than the ones we're accustomed to using today. Here's a final one to show you. This one might look familiar from that end. It's the same grip as I showed you to start with, but you'll see it's a lot shorter. The reason being, I broke it. I probably whacked it on a music stand or something accidentally, and there we are. Look after your batons. So the best thing to do is to get into a shop and to try out a load of batons. Here in London, in the UK where I am, there's a fabulous shop called Guivier's, which is essentially a stringed instrument shop, but also has a fantastic selection of batons. Go into such a shop for 20 minutes, try out all sorts of batons, they won't mind at all, see which one you find works best for you. You might, however, want to watch the next video, the third video in this series, where I'll be talking about how you hold the baton, which will give you a little bit more armour for how to test out the batons in that shop. As a footnote, let me just add, some people talk about rehearsal batons and concert batons. The rehearsal baton being something a little bit more basic, perhaps cheap, perhaps with a thicker stick, just a bit of cork on the end. The concert baton being something much finer, possibly, probably custom made, with a lovely little bit of coloured wood perhaps at the end, costing a good bit more. So the one that costs a good bit more you don't want to use for rehearsals. If you break it, you've lost a bit more money than if you just break the cheap one. I don't really go with that. I understand the financial argument, but I know no instrumentalist who would have a rehearsal instrument and a concert instrument, well, except possibly apart from pianists and organists. But in a symphony orchestra that certainly wouldn't be the case. It strikes me as very odd for a conductor to swap from one baton to the other. My recommendation is simply to find a baton which fits you well, feels good in your hand, buy several, so if you do break one or two, you've got a backup. And if, like me, you're happy with one like this, which is a pretty simple, basic baton, if you break it, it's only £10, you're not going to be too upset. Thanks for watching.